we've had some pretty good weather here. I ended up in a enforced staycation in quarantine, but the weather was pretty reasonable. I'm sorry that it's created such havoc. We don't control this virus. We have a bit more control over it in the UK, and that's why we're acting so sort of strongly to make sure that we do change when the picture changes across the world. And we are adding countries back as and when as well. I think this week, last week, we did add some countries back in. It's, if you like, easier to get into a quarantine situation than to come out.
Now, this announcement late on Thursday night fired a starting pistol for a mad scramble for ways home. Long queues.
Late for 2 weeks. Our flight out of Nice Airport was the last before the quarantine changes, and we touched down just 4 hours before they come into effect. Busy on board, but it was a pleasant flight. 1 or 2 spare seats, but plenty of people who, like us, had changed their plans to come back early. Next to me was a guy who had been in France since lockdown began and had changed his flight a day early because he didn't know what changes might come in that could see that extended even longer. Very much the feeling of relief, even though there were some people on board still very keen to get off the plane once we had landed.
Now, in the past few moments while I've been talking to you, the first flight from Paris has landed, and there's at least 4 more before 11 o'clock coming from all parts of France. Those touching down today in Gatwick and airports across the country, they face 2 weeks of quarantine.
They do, James. Thank you very much indeed. Overseas reporter at Gatwick's North Terminal. Peter Allen is overseas reporter in Paris. Hello, Peter.
Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning. The French aren't going to like this. What's going to happen? What's their reaction at governmental level?
The French are absolutely devastated by this. Very diplomatically, he said the country regrets the British decision and has confirmed that it's going to lead to a reciprocal measure. So the French effectively are going to introduce quarantine to anybody arriving from Britain. We expect that to happen within the next couple of days. We expect Monday that will start.
So that will be French citizens returning from the UK to France, or British citizens going to France?
Anybody arriving from Britain effectively will have to self-isolate as well. That hasn't been confirmed yet, Andrew, but that is what we're expecting to happen and expected to be confirmed probably on Monday, I would imagine.
Peter, is France in the midst of some second wave?
I wouldn't say it's a second wave. There's a cause for concern. There has been a spike in coronavirus cases. There's been about 2,000 extra cases over the last week. Remember, 30,000 people have officially died from coronavirus, sadly, since the start of the pandemic. That's after a lower total than Britain and indeed Italy. But there's cause for concern, and new measures are being brought in. Masks in public places look very likely for the whole of Paris over the next few days as well.
Yeah. Is it true that tests on people became free in France from July the 25th, and that in 1 week after that, 600,000 people were tested?
Yes, but that doesn't mean there's universal testing. It still isn't that easy to get a test. Technically, France has an excellent National Health Service, and access is free to a lot of people, and there are a lot of tests being given to people, made available to people, but that doesn't mean universal testing yet, Andrew.
Okay. Peter, thank you very much indeed for that. Peter Allen, overseas reporter in Paris. Let's take the business angle now. How a business is supposed to plan to fail. Luke Faragella is Chief Executive Officer of Specialist Aviation Services, a former Chief Operating Officer for Flyme and Wizz Air as well. Luke, very good morning to you. Do you understand why our government has done this?
Morning, Andrew. Nice to talk to you again. I'm absolutely flabbergasted and continue to be outraged on behalf of A, the airline industry, and B, on behalf of someone who runs a business I have interest in Belgium, in Italy, and other countries around the European peninsula. There is absolutely no way anybody can plan with any level of confidence on anything at the moment, because the timeframes the government are using and the blunt tool they're using to wipe out countries, massive countries, is absolutely devastating for everybody concerned in this process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't understand why this has happened. It must be because cases per 100,000 have gone up, but I would contend that this is because there has been further testing, and we're seeing more cases because we're testing more. And I sympathise with you. Why don't they do it region by region? Is anybody talking to this government from your industry?
So everybody's talking
In 300 yards, keep right to continue towards Tons Lane, A355.
country, not as individual countries. So you've got the countries as small as Belgium and Switzerland. You've got a country as large as France or Spain. You could argue today I could fly to Switzerland and just cross the border very easily into France. So it makes a mockery of the everyone coming back from France question. The other thing is that people tend to go away to a specific...
Keep right, then continue straight.
All the way around any country at any time. And therefore, if it was me, for example, I'd travel to Belgium, to a particular part of Belgium for my business, and travel back from that particular part of Belgium. I don't think there's a need to just wipe out every single country every time. And if you're going to do that, you're missing the point, because in places like France and Spain, Italy and others, there are hotspots, but they're growing in particular areas. So you've got to look at those particular areas as we are doing in this country. There's nothing in this country that's replicating what we're doing abroad. Leicester is, for example, in a different place than London right now.
Just look, we all understand the plight of people who have raced back to avoid quarantine. We might want to get into the insurance implications of that and
Continue straight.
Employees pay if the government is saying that you've got to self-isolate. We might even argue this, Amber, whether we should be testing on the borders.
In a quarter of a mile, at the roundabout, take the first exit onto the M4 slip road to London, Heathrow Airport.
Industry, the first thing that people think about is an airplane taking off, okay? And there's a pilot and there's people on it. Just tell me about the aviation industry, just briefly, the wider aspects other than an aircraft taking off. How many people are involved? How big's the business?
So there's an estimate for every one person who's on the aircraft. So let's talk about the pilot. There's an estimate that there are between 20 and 25 more people involved in the ecosystem of aviation who are involved in making sure that flight departs. And those are all of the backroom people from the airlines, but also the ground handling companies, catering companies, all of the airports. I had to fly to Istanbul for an essential reason last weekend. It was like going through a ghost town, some of the airports I was going through. So if you were running an airport at the moment or an airline, you wouldn't just be looking at those front end.
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M4.
There are hundreds of thousands of people whose jobs are on the line if we don't get this right. And airlines are getting no opportunity at all to flex their very flexible commercial processes because of the short notice. 24 hours is ridiculous for anybody to have to receive news that you can't fly to a country when you've got people in that country. Rosters for pilots take through between 3 and 6 weeks to plan and execute.
Continue on M4 for 9 miles.
Otherwise, you're losing the benefits of it. If you're saying to people,